and confirmed. We have no live. Good morning, unusually. For a cabinet meeting. Welcome to the meeting of South Oxfordshire District Council Cabinet. My name is David Rain. I'll be chairing the meeting. Sitting alongside me is Steve, who will take the roll call, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll call out members' names in alphabetical order. If you could confirm that you're in the meeting room from the benefit of the public, please. So Councillor Peter Horban.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Councillor Robin Bennett.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Councillor Sue Cooper.
Present in the room, but only for about a quarter of an hour as I have to go to a meeting with Biffa.
Thank you. Councillor Maggie Phillips-Over-Rivers.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Councillor Andrea Powell.
Present in the room.
Thank you. Councillor David Ruane.
Present in the room.
Councillor Anne-Marie Simpson is on her way, and we have an apology from Councillor Freddie Van Mierlo. Thank you, Chair.
And the minutes of the last meeting, is everybody happy that they're accurate record?
Yep.
Yes.
And nothing to raise as a result of those? Absolutely. Item 3 is declarations of interest. To receive declarations of disposable pecuniary interest, other registrable interests, and non-registrable interests, or any conflicts of interest in respect of items on this agenda. Does anyone have anything to declare? General shaking of heads. Urgent business and chairs announcements. I don't have any urgent business or any announcements to make. Public participation. Steve, I understand we have one member of the public.
That's correct, Chair. Yes, we have Mr. John Salmons present online, and he wishes to speak regarding the Climate Action Plan Performance Report. Mr. Salmons.
Thank you. Good morning, councillors. So I have a question for the Leader of the Council today relating to agenda item 8. You may recall I asked Councillor Powell a question at the Cabinet meeting on the 9th of November regarding the Great Western Park depot scandal. I thought my question was quite clear. It's easy to make out in the recording of the meeting. So I was disappointed to see it misrepresented in the minutes before you today and misquoted in the written response I received 3 weeks after the meeting. My question was regarding what steps Councillor Powell had taken to deliver on her personal commitment to ensure residents' concerns over this scandal were addressed. But the response made no mention of any actions taken by the Cabinet member. I can only infer from this that she has taken no action to deliver on her commitment. What the response did state, at least, is that future performance reports would provide ongoing transparency around this matter. And this is broadly consistent with the Council's position, as I understand it, which is that it refuses to accept there is anything wrong with the principle of changing public open space within a master planned residential community into a large-scale industrial depot. It refuses to listen to the hundreds of residents who have told them this is unacceptable. And it refuses to give residents any reassurance this council will stop interfering with the delivery of the wildflower meadow residents were promised when they purchased their homes. The only thing the council can offer is transparency. And yet on the same day I received that response, the 1st of December, an earlier draft of the Q2 climate report before you this evening was published as part of the agenda for the climate advisory meeting on the 11th of December. Although a draft, it was published 2 full months after the reporting period had ended. It stated in relation to item SD7 that there had been no progress to report in Q2. The RAG status was red. A comment stated the project was on hold. And yet 3 weeks later, you are now presented with a different version of the report and a completely contradictory recollection of events. The only consistency between these two accounts is that neither provides any clarity over the council's intentions in relation to the public open space on Great Western Park. It seems the council can't even offer transparency. So my question to the leader of the council is a simple one, and one he really should be able to answer without resorting to a written response. My question is, does the leader of the council have any empathy for residents who continue to experience considerable distress as a result of the ongoing uncertainty over this council's intentions in relation to this scandal, particularly when those residents' trust in this council has been so badly damaged by the council's actions to date? Thank you.
My response at this stage, and I'll undertake to go back and look at the question and the answer from the previous meeting. But my understanding is I don't accept the characterisation of this as a scandal. An application was put in for a development of a site in the Vale of White Horse. There were objections, and that application was then withdrawn. I don't see what else we could have done within that process that would have allayed suspicions from local people. But I will undertake to look at the question and the answer and see whether it did address questions that were raised. If we can now move on to recommendations and updates from other committees.
Thank you, Chair. So paper circulated yesterday sets out the update from other committees, starting with the Scrutiny Committee, which met on the 6th of December. They looked at the Community Infrastructure Levy Pilot Grant Fund policy, which is on your agenda this morning. The committee supported the policy and made suggestions for the officers and cabinet member to consider. And these points are set out 1 to 4 on the paper that's been published and circulated to members, and they have been taken into account in the Head of Finance's report before Cabinet today. The officer will highlight these during the presentation on the item later in the meeting. Moving on to the Joint Scrutiny Committee, which met on the 7th of December. The committee discussed the Community Safety Partnerships annual report, the performance of the waste management contractor in 2022, and the joint local plan. There were no recommendations made to Cabinet. Just to note, on the joint local plan, the committee welcomed the plan, was impressed by the ambition of the consultation documents, and praised the officer's work. The committee made some suggestions, which have been referred to the Head of Policy and Programmes for consideration in consultation with the Cabinet Member for Planning, in line with the delegation awarded by Cabinet at its last meeting. Moving on to the Climate and Ecological Emergencies Advisory Committee, which met on the 11th of December, there were a number of progress reports and discussions on the Berkshire, Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire Wildlife Trust project for Oxfordshire and the areas just creeping into the very north of South Oxfordshire, decarbonisation of the council's leisure centres, and progress on retrofitting the council's buildings. Going back to the BBOUT projects, the committee suggests that Cabinet should consider how it can support BBOUT projects in future. I think this item needs to be taken away to officers for consideration and a report back in due course. Thank you.
So any actions that are required for this meeting have been taken into account by the officers in their papers.
Chair.
Yep.
I'll just comment on that last point. First of all, if you haven't, Cabinet members haven't watched the recording of that CF meeting, it was a very, very good meeting with some excellent reports from officers. So I recommend that if you have the time to go and watch that. But on that particular thing about the nature park, I can't remember the terminology for the Otmore project. I think that is something that I hope we will take forward as part of our corporate plan consultation, which, as you know, we're working on at the moment, and we'll take out in the spring of next year. So I think we've got a kind of a direct line of follow-up opportunity there.
Anything else on those? In which case we'll move on to item 7, which is community infrastructure levy grants policy. Councillor Barker, really introducing this.
Yes, I'll just do a very quick intro. As we've discussed this several times already, but it's before us now to formally go through the cabinet process. The sort of recommendations from scrutiny were very useful, had a good debate in scrutiny, and some changes have been made to the document that's in front of us as a result. And as we know, it's to use 750,000 from our district council still allocation towards the still grants. I'll leave it there. Hand over to Mark.
Mark, would you like to add to that?
Indeed, many thank you, Councillor Parker, for introducing the item. In addition to the points made by the scrutiny committee, there were several recommendations noted, which was summarised as follows. The committee asked for the following amendments to report, and these have been amended as follows. Clarity wanted on point 19 of the report, showing income and expenditure. The report has been updated to show this. In addition, a sub-bullet point has been added to this section of the report to show still funding requests submitted for consideration as part of the 24-25 budget setting process. Should all of some of these requests be allocated, this will reduce the balances shown in point 19. On the scoring matrix, officers are asked to check with the climate action team if climate adaptation could be added to the scoring in column G. This request has been passed to the Council's climate action team, who have responded as follows. I am happy that climate adaptation, or mitigation as it's also called, would already be covered under the climate and ecological emergency criteria. So should a project come forward which addresses making the impacts of climate change less severe, for example, tree planting or natural flood alleviation schemes, as possibly the most likely schemes to come forward from community groups and parish councils, that the scoring matrix is sufficient. There's also work that could be done when it comes to publicising the scheme, bringing our project ideas to promote climate action. We can review this, of course, after the pilot process project, and one option going forward could be to split the climate resilience and mitigation as one scoring criteria, as the benefits are often connected, as nature recovery is another. Therefore, no updates have been made to the report as a result of that recommendation. On the scoring matrix column B, committee wanted to include gaps in provision. Committee discussed inclusion of active travel as part of the scoring matrix to help tackle gaps in provision. Updates have been made to section 4, decision-making process, section of the policy, and column B of the scoring matrix to reflect this. The committee asked for consideration for communication of the pilot scheme. Updates have been made to section 1, advance notice of the policy, and bullet point 1 of paragraph 10 in the report to reflect this. The committee suggested a 12-month pilot scheme to take learnings from that to either return to the scheme or make adaptations to it. Section 8 of the policy, illustrative timeline and process, and the final row of the table in paragraph 11 of the report cover this. I thank the scrutiny committee for their feedback. It was clear that the members had taken the time to fully understand the report and the policy, and their feedback was very well received and very useful. I'm happy to cover any questions or queries the members might have regarding the scheme or the report.
I have a quick question before on the report. Are you saying that each of the recommendations 1, 2, and 3 from scrutiny have been incorporated into the report?
The first item has been. The second item, following advice from the climate action team, it was felt that no amendments were required, and that the report and the scoring matrix already covered the requirement. Amendments have been made in relation to points 3 and point 4.
Okay. So, thanks. I just want to be clear on that because these were recommendations from scrutiny and cabinet might take a view as to whether they accept them or not. Okay, shall I open it up? Any further questions? First of all, to Mark.
I had a question. Well, hi, Mark. Just a couple of questions. With the role of the infrastructure team in this assessing applications, well, twice, will you sort of be assessing whether that places, what kind of demands that places on the team in this trial year? Was that one of the things we'll be looking at? And what will happen to the funding pot if it's not all allocated? Will it just return to the SIL overall pot?
The first question, did you say has the demands of the scheme been taken into account in terms of the resourcing available? Was that?
Yeah, for you when you're having to review the applicants.
Yes, we believe that we've got sufficient resourcing in order to cover this, and the SIL administration allocation can be used to fund additional resource if required. As this is a pilot scheme, and it's not something that is usual in terms of the use of SIL. It will be interesting to see how this actually received and what sort of take up there is through the expression of interest process. And should we require additional resourcing, we would need to look at that accordingly. But based on our current team setup and experience across the board in terms of developer contributions, understanding the regulations and the council's support from the council's grants team, we think that we should be sufficiently resourced in order to be able to support this. In terms of the second question, if the funds aren't fully used, they're not lost. They would remain allocated to the project, where a decision can then be taken about whether or not a future scheme is set up on this, or if it isn't, then those funds will be returned back to the SIL pot in order for allocation to other schemes.
Yeah, and just one other thing on the active travel, because this is for third parties. I'm just trying to picture what sort of organisation could deliver an active travel scheme. Are we thinking parish councils could do that if they had a small active travel scheme? Is that who's the audience for that? Given that we already get separate money to the county council.
Quite possibly, but because again, we've tried to open the scheme as broad as possible to encourage as many eligible schemes to come forward. There might be some schemes which we find that just don't come forward as part of that. However, I think that the comments made in relation to active transport were not necessarily delivered purely for delivering active transport schemes, but for delivering schemes in locations which then meant that those pieces of infrastructure were more accessible via active transport routes than the need for people to get into their cars and travel further afield. So not necessarily an active transport scheme itself, but schemes whereby delivering that scheme will make it more accessible to more people through active transport routes.
Sue.
Thank you. Yeah, I must go now, but I just wanted to say I think this is a really good idea, this scheme. I'm sure we'll learn a lot because it's a pilot. That's the whole intention. And it'll be interesting to see what proposals come forward. So I wish it well, and I wish everybody else happy Christmas. Thanks. Bye.
I think Maggie was.
Yeah, are we into discussion?
Yep.
Oh, I've got a question.
Oh, you have a question.
I have a question. It's a pilot scheme. How long is the pilot running? Is it for one turn? One round?
Yeah, it's one cycle. Illustrative timeline sets out how long we think that will take. But in reality, by the time that we've gone through the applications process and assessed those, you're probably looking 6 months before we sort of have an idea as to which funds are being supported. But beyond that, then, because of the nature of the scheme and the type of projects we're looking to see supported, we might not see some of those schemes come forward for a period of time after that. But at the moment, it's due to run for one cycle. But then we can then review that and decide if we want to run a second cycle or if there are any amendments that are needed or a more permanent basis put into place.
Thank you.
Maggie.
I've got a couple of comments. First of all, I remember quite a long time ago, I would like to give some credit to Councillor Lee Rowlands, actually, because he had suggested probably 3 or so years ago that we look at potentially a SIL scheme, or whether SIL can fund some capital projects. So I just wanted to say thank you, and hopefully it will serve as a little bit of an encouragement to him. Secondly, I want to thank Councillor Peter Paul Barker for suggesting that this accessibility audit is included as part of the scheme. I will just read out quickly what that means. It's where the project is for built infrastructure, an accessibility audit that ensures that buildings and services are accessible to everyone and help organisations to address accessibility barriers and create inclusive environments will be required, the cost of which can be included as part of the funding request. I genuinely believe that if we are providing public facilities or public services, we need to be really careful to make sure that all are included. We do have infrastructure, buildings, facilities that are sometimes dated, and actually we can use this grant as an opportunity to update those to make sure that people can, that they can be genuinely public, right? So thank you for including that. And just to say that this is just another string to our bow in terms of investment in our communities. We have quite a rich grant programme, and thank you, Robin, for making the point about capacity, because we do have so many different grants, including the capital grants, the Everyone Active, the councillor grants, the revenue grants. What am I forgetting? We've got Berensfield specific grants. And I think we're really lucky to be able to provide this investment. It would be helpful to have a kind of a tally of the total investment, because I think it is truly impressive. And yeah, and it does support a lot of local voluntary sector and parish council and other types of organisation, which I think is great. So thank you all, and thank you, Mark and team, for really what is a very well thought through matrix and yeah, grant programme overall.
Anyone else? Andrew?
Yes, I'm really happy to see this get to this stage, and I think the adjustments that have been made definitely improve what we've got in front of us today, and I think it's an excellent pilot, which hopefully will lead to a longer term, you know, a permanent process, but let's see. But I think one of the things that really struck me when reading through it was, you know, we've sat with our parish councils as they have struggled with their decision-making matrix of their own when determining how to spend their SIL. I mean, a parish like Benson has received a large amount of money, the largest amount of money they've kind of probably ever had to spend on projects, and they've struggled to come up with a good way of scoring and deciding what to spend their money on and how to consult locally. So I think this will help once we sort of publicise this and explain things like the accessibility issues. It was great in Benson. One of the things they funded is a new playground that has very accessible play equipment, and so they've gone through that process. But I think this will just help to build that capability and that understanding of how projects and how this kind of funding can be leveraged to improve accessibility, to improve quality of life in our communities and so on. So I think this is a fantastic addition, and I'm looking forward to to see what sort of projects come forward, because I think none of us really know who's going to apply, what kind of projects are going to come across. But I think in terms of that overall kind of matrix of different schemes and different approaches we have, hopefully the parishes will learn, the other organisations that could apply for this will learn, and our teams will learn also. I think Mark, I mean, the years that I've been dealing with Mark and his team, I mean, I think Mark has developed an incredible expertise in how SIL works, and it's still a relatively new mechanism. So I think we're very lucky to have that expertise in-house. So well done, everybody, and I'm really looking forward to being able to discuss this with my parishes and other groups and encourage them to put forward expressions of interest. Thanks.
Anne-Marie?
Yeah, no, I'd like to echo that, actually. I think it is exciting, and I think it is good that it's a pilot and that we learn along the way. And I'm also pleased, obviously with the progress of the joint local plan, to see paragraph 12, which talks about the SIL spending strategy could be reviewed and current allocations as set out in point 6 of this report be amended to reapportion the direction of funding. This option will be considered alongside the new joint local plan to understand if there are opportunities to make close links between the new infrastructure delivery plan and the spending strategy. And of course, we did review our SIL charging schedule a year ago, is it? So I think that it's nice to have seen the front end where we hopefully will be raising, I don't know how much more exactly it would be in comparison what would have been under the old schedule, but we are raising more funds for infrastructure to be spent across, and this seems to be adding to a sort of more nuanced way, a needed way to get it out there. So yeah, I'm happy with this.
Okay.
Does I just have one quick?
Go on.
Well, I just wanted to, I mean, attended a county meeting about infrastructure spending a couple of weeks ago, and it's only South Oxfordshire and Vale that collect CIL and pay it out again. City Council does, Charlwell and West Oxfordshire don't. I think it's only South and Vale that collect that money and then trust the third sector and community organisations to actually spend some of that money. I think that's really good. And as Anne-Marie says, as we're collecting more of it as well, it's really, I guess, a good example of co-production. I'm really pleased to see that as everyone else has said, that we're doing that. I think that's really positive.
Yeah. As has been said, a lot of services to our communities are provided by not us, not county, not the ICB. Some of us visited a charity recently, which is providing health and wellbeing work, and previously I would have had to send them off to the ICB to try and get some money. I can point them towards this. We'll see whether they actually qualify once they do their application and their research. So I think it's good to have another stream that people can access. It's good that we're doing it as a pilot so that we can learn lessons and maybe adapt it in future if it's not working. So would you like to summarise?
If I could, yes, summarise and formally propose recommendations. So it's for Cabinet to approve that this pilot scheme goes ahead. If approved, then the 750,000 would be allocated as part of the upcoming budget round, and therefore, would be available for this process to start to receive applications and so on in the next financial year. And as you can see in point B of the recommendations, the sort of usual notes, the delegated authority is the relevant head of service in consultation with the cabinet member, make minor amendments as we need to. But I don't think there's anything envisaged, following the very good review process that we've had already with scrutiny and the cabinet. I'm confident that the scheme is ready to go.
Okay. On discussion, can I see those in favour? No one against? So that's carried unanimously. On item 8 is the corporate performance report and climate action plan performance reports. Councillor Powell, is this you?
Yeah, these reports are the course 2 reports, which are for noting. We've all become very familiar with these reports, how they work, how they can be used, how hopefully the committees like scrutiny can also use these reports to pick out areas that they want to dive into in more depth. So I don't have anything particular to say about them, only to ask Cabinet to note them and to use them in their day-to-day interactions with the heads of service and service delivery teams. Thanks.
Any questions or comments? Councillor Simpson first.
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments, obviously picking on the areas which come up with against Cabinet Member for Planning. ECW3, support for the SODC consortium bid for strategic enhancement of 5G infrastructure. I'm very pleased that we did support them because they were successful. So that's something I'd like to highlight. And also HLN10, I think it's 45 affordable homes in that quarter, 37 2-beds, 7 1-bed and 1 3-bed. So I think, that seems to be something also that might work in favour of some members who are very keen to see more.
Mine was a question. So these are great and so detailed, and I just wondered whether, and actually it's a question for Councillor Powell anyway, but whether we could think about how we can communicate them with our communities. One question is, do they go in the parish and town council newsletter? I suspect that probably is the case, but just to kind of make that point. And then it would be really good that, yeah, there is a comms around, you know, this is what is happening via social media, which seems to be a good way that people access information. Yeah, and I wondered as well whether we have a sense of kind of clicks when it comes to the website. Yeah, I think it's a shame if, you know, so much time is spent preparing these. It's a shame if people don't are not able to know that they're there. I know we put them in our reports, the parish council. I know Councillor Simpson does that regularly, but I think if we can kind of touch, well, yeah.
So lots of different ways to answer and lots of different areas of activity. First of all, yes, the sheer existence of the reports is very widely communicated through all different channels, but of course they're a historical record, and some of the actions in them are actually quite old. By the time they get through the process of reporting and they appear, they might have taken place 3 or 4 months previously. So there would have been some comms around that activity at the time earlier. So the specific activity is promoted and communicated as opposed to the fact that it's been reported in a report. You get the distinction. And then, of course, we do have under the second theme quite a lot of reporting about the kind of social media and other promotional activity that takes place on a kind of a day-to-day operational basis, because that was one of our areas of focus. One of our priority projects was to be more communicative and be more transparent and provide more information. So the comms team provide a lot of input into the report in Theme 2 in particular, and also in the climate action team, climate action report, where there's a lot of activity and action that's reported about how we are promoting not only our own activities to deliver our carbon reduction in targets, but also how we're encouraging others to change behaviours and what other resources are available. So it's kind of threaded through in multiple ways, and we're always looking at ways that we can improve the reporting and the access. And certainly as we move into our next cycle of strategic planning, we will be thinking again about how we, rather than producing, you know, what are pretty lengthy and quite dense reports on a quarterly basis, maybe we can be doing things on a more ongoing and interactive basis through our new website and our new platforms that we've got for consultation and communication. So I think there is a lot going on there. I would love it if council talked even more about the reports, and whenever they're available, I try to let everybody know about them and point them in the right direction. So I'm hoping that they are communicated widely, but so there's always more that can be done. But I think that there's, on specific areas of activity, it's better to have very targeted announcements and better piece of comms around a particular activity rather than it being about the report.
Thank you.
Just to go against that, I've got a couple of comments about the format of the report. One of them thrown up by our public speaker. I wonder if we have to say Q2, because to some people Q2 is up to the end of June. We're embedded in using council years, municipal years, but not everybody is.
So just put the dates on them.
If it's covering Q2s to the end of September. So actually the latest possible report. The other thing is around the amount of strategic context that's added. I think if we're having strategic, if there is strategic context, can it please be referred to how it affects us locally? Because there's one on the climate change one that talks about Northern Ireland having its warmest period on record, and that seemed a bit not targeted specifically at the report. And my final one was on the infographics. I mean, it's always it's very subjective what you pick out as being in infographic, but on the climate one, it talks about, yes, we bought 1 electric refuse vehicle, but we did also buy 8 diesel vehicles, and I think we we need to be upfront about doing that and why we did it, rather than just focusing on the one electric one that we bought. But the fact that the reports flag those things up is useful, because otherwise they wouldn't be flagged up. Anyone else?
Well, sorry.
Yeah.
Just, I guess, the performance highlight slide, maybe might be good to make that available as a separate slide that people can use, because that's quite a good way of
I think they do that.
do they make it available as an individual PDF?
Yeah, I've definitely seen that on the corporate plan page of our website, that has
Okay.
been picked out
Okay.
previously.
That's
I'll
quite a good.
check that it's done every time, but it certainly has been done
And
previously,
that you can print to a PDF and just print that on the page.
Yeah,
but as a
Um,
digital, something you could embed within a parish report or something.
yeah,
like
that,
is that what you
that
mean?
could be
Yeah,
helpful, because
yeah.
it's sort of, it is a good summary. And I'm just thinking of my department, but it does include a couple of things like the Berensfield Community Delivery Plan, that has got local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. So even underneath all these plans, there's a whole load more detailed plans, and it just shows how much is going on. And those plans can also be seen online. And indeed, some of those things contain actions done by community groups as well as the council. So there you go.
Okay. So it's there, it's on the corporate plan page of the website.
But presumably we're not really going to change the format until the next
No, that's
round
right.
of
Yeah.
corporate.
So all the comments, Jay, your comment about the strategic context, we've passed that feedback back from previous reports as well. So in that instance, it was on the economic piece. You know, there's a lot of very, very big picture strategic context, which maybe we can really kind of bring down, focus it down a bit more onto our local, and link more clearly to our strategic themes.
Okay, anything else? If not, then read and share widely. And thank you to everybody involved in putting that together. Moving on to item 9, budget monitoring. Head of Finance. No, there's budget monitoring quarter 2 first.
Yeah.
Item 9. And the Head of Finance is sitting quietly in the corner. Would you like to introduce this?
Peter Paul's going to introduce it.
Oh.
Yeah, just to say, as we know, this is, well, as we just talked about Q2, this is Q2, therefore April to September actuals, and how that compares to the budget. Revenue and capital, but mostly in this case, what we're looking at is the revenue outturn. And I just wanted to call out very specifically that, as the report mentions in paragraph 7, there is a projected overspend after the adjustments of £1 million in terms of increased costs, which are described in detail in the following paragraphs, and where that's come from. And I think we're all aware of those additional cost pressures. But because at the same time we have increased income, particularly treasury income, as it mentions in paragraph 7, expected across the whole year to be over budget by around 2 million. Where this, in terms of this year's budget outturn, we still expect the position to be okay. And we'll be talking about the fact also in the next item that this year's budget was anticipating that we would draw on reserves by around 600,000, which is a very small withdrawal compared to the previous decade, pretty much, but nevertheless, they're drawing reserves. And so there's some possibility, as we can see from this report, that we may not need that, but we'll obviously have to see how the whole year turns out.
Sam, would you like to add anything to that? Just make sure people are looking in the right place. This was a separate document that was circulated.
I'd like to apologise for the lateness of the report being circulated.
It's fine. Anyone?
Well, just a related comment. Are we giving? I feel like this is the sort of document that we should be giving scrutiny a chance to review. And I guess with the timing that may not have happened. Or did it?
Did.
No, the scrutiny considers the outturn report. The scrutiny can clearly call this report in at will.
but not in advance of, they haven't looked at it in advance of this meeting.
If they were to make any recommendations, we will bring it to the next cabinet meeting. Because any recommendations about our spending would be things that we'd need to take action on. So we put it on the agenda at the next meeting. Any other questions or comments, Councillor Powell?
Yeah, I have a question about the throwing my pen around. The comment you just made there, Peter Paul, about the obviously the bonus we've received from the higher interest rates and the sort of, you know, what business was used to call bottom line money. Basically, it just goes straight to our bottom line. I mean, and improves what might otherwise have been a negative outturn. Do we just assume that additional earnings from investments will just go straight into the reserves essentially and just be held for future years, or is there any process that we have of a sort of a like an upsides budget that says, well, if we generate this amount and we do better than we thought through, you know, just the fact that interest rates have been higher, are there projects or resources that we would spend that on in order to improve service delivery or to make any particular investments, or are we just kind of banking that for a rainy day in the future?
So there's a couple of points actually. South has a policy of using interest in the year after it is earned. So what we have done last year and will do this year is there's already an amount of money allocated in the medium-term financial plan from this year's earnings identified that will support next year's revenue budget.
Okay. Good.
So the extra money from this year, the first call on that money, the extra money earned this year will be to support this year's revenue situation as just described. Any extra would go into the pot. Now, actually, by the time you've taken off what we've allocated for next year and what we use for this year, there wouldn't be that much to use.
Right.
I think one of the challenges we've got going forward, and it's sort of alluded to in the next paper, is clearly that the interest situation at the moment is probably transitory, particularly after, well, depends how you read yesterday's or the day before's announcement about inflation, but certainly, you know, inflation seems to be dropping faster than people thought at the moment, and it could change. But certainly the extra money we're getting from interest is probably transitory, whilst the extra cost we're incurring that we've seen through inflation is going to be there forever. So I think that's the reality at the moment. We're already projecting our MTFP, as Peter Paul alluded to use reserves this year to balance the budget. We're going to use more in future. So I think the interest at the moment is welcome in terms of offsetting the increased costs, but we won't have it forever.
Okay. But just to repeat there, so the policy is that any kind of upside on interest is allocated in the following financial year's budget. Yeah. Thank you.
Tempted to go on finance director here and say it's just money, and either we've got money in reserves or we've got more money coming than we expected, but it's all money, and it's what we've got available to spend next year, or to make up any shortfall in this year. It doesn't come in with a red spot on the corner saying this is the trust fund. Right. Any other questions or comments about the financial progress? In which case we'll move on to next item, which is the budget process. Again, Peter Paul, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you. Here we are looking at the budget for 24-25, and this report is to inform Cabinet of progress made to date in preparing that budget, both the revenue and capital programme through to 2029, and to report on funding issues that we need to consider when setting budget in February. As identified in the report, for this year, we set a budget that was balanced by drawn reserves of 644,000. We just to that. But with an increasing drawn reserves, hugely increasing drawn reserves anticipated to be required across all years of the medium-term financial plan, which all councils have to provide every year for the following 4 years after the budget year. As this year has unfolded, inflation was staying higher than expected. We've just seen that it's fallen slightly more than expected, but yeah, these things vary, don't they? But for sure, it's nowhere near the 2% target as yet. And that has led to a number of cost increases, which we are going to be baked into the council's costs in the whole of the MTFP period. In terms of the local government finance settlement, we have had more information very recently. I'll let Simon talk to that in detail, but we don't expect the actual paper from the government until I think the next few days or even early next year. So we'll hear about that in a minute. In terms of this year's budget activity, I think we're all aware that the focus for council this year is very much on the capital programme and changing the way that is reviewed and managed because it's becoming much more significant for us. So there's a budget challenge exercise which is underway across all departments that have capital budgets. And those meetings are taking place now and also first week of January. So I'll attend all of those that I can. And in terms of revenue, we haven't done the revenue challenge across every department this year, but we will be doing it in 3 specific areas where the revenue budgets are quite challenging. And again, in the same time period this week and early January. And then following the completion of those budget challenge exercises, officers will work with members on the final budget proposals. So obviously that will be with all cabinet members. And that's also where we will include and discuss any discretionary items, because the challenge process has dealt with non-discretionary. So that will be where we start to include, if we can, and obviously we wish to, discretionary items. Also on capital. And that's also when the medium-term financial plan will start to take shape, and we can see how that's changing compared to last year in terms of the expected costs and pressures over that 5-year period. And I'll hand over to Simon.
So the draft local finance settlement was published earlier this week. It is in draft and is subject to consultation. The final we expect to be published sort of towards late January, early February. As was expected and indicated in the previously issued finance policy statement, it's a 1-year settlement and it did not deviate from the policy statement very much, so there were no particular surprises. What it means for South is that the growth in the government funding element of core revenue spending power will be 4.63%. That compares to the headline announcement of a 6.5% increase in funding across the sector. In reality, for district councils, the maximum increase a district council got was 4.9%. By comparison, our partner, Council at Vale, got 3.91%. The council tax referendum limits remain as expected for Shire district councils, that being the maximum of 3% or £5, whichever is greater. For the second year running, the settlement to enable an increase in funding to all councils, that has been included in the settlement a funding guarantee. That funding guarantee continues to be referred to as one-off, and as part of South's settlement, represents £624,000 of the government funding figure this year. In reality, the increase in government funding, what does a 4.31% increase in, or the 4.63% increase actually look like? It looks like £258,000 is what we'll get from government. Don't spend it all at once.
The obvious question is, how does that compare to what was in the MTFP?
The MTFP assumed that core revenue spending power would stay flat. So we would see, because core revenue spending power is a combination of council tax and the government funding. So we assumed that council tax would go up by the £5 and that government funding would reduce. So we're actually about £600,000 better off than we thought we would be. Clearly, the reality is we still don't know what we'll get in future going forward. I think there's all sorts. It's interesting. The 6.5% headline increase was 0.1% above the rate of inflation last month. So what would they have given us had they announced the funding next week? Is an interesting question, because they were able to say they gave us an above inflation increase. So I think it is very challenging to know exactly what they'll do going forward.
I got a spreadsheet from government yesterday about the new homes bonus. Was that in line with what we were expecting?
The problem we have with new homes,
When you said we're 600,000 better off, is
that's
everything?
everything.
Yeah.
The problem we have with new homes bonus is because the government is continuing with it, but it is still wrapping up everything in a guarantee, if you like. So if you look at new homes bonus compared to next year, we are earning, I think it looks like about £350,000 more in new homes bonus to reflect an increase in tax base. But our core funding guarantee has gone down by over 250,000. So it's a little bit in and out at the moment, and it has been for a while. That they've although new homes bonus is still in the mix, it is being adjusted. If you like, the overall bottom line total is being adjusted to achieve an overall objective.
The guarantee is after the core funding and
It's a balancing figure, effectively.
Yeah. Any other questions?
So, sorry, so effectively, if I understand correctly, we are okay for next year, but the future will look really uncertain yet again because we don't have that
I think
clarity as to what will happen.
I think this, obviously the budget is a work in progress, and there are a number of things we're working on. I think our assumption at the moment is that 24-25 will be okay, and that's through a combination of getting the better funding that we thought and also interest rates being where they are. I think the reality is, I think it'd be very difficult to see 25-26 being anything other than some sort of rollover funding agreement, because either we won't have had an election by this time next year, or there'll be a new government in power, and whether it will have had time to get to grips with changing the way local government is funded in that time, I think it will be very challenging for them. So I think we can probably expect another settlement like this. There are a number of scenarios we can map here. At that stage, clearly, the expectation will be that interest rates have started to fall, but the cost increases we have seen will be embedded. And what we do know, and again, it all depends on which government's in power, but for example, the OBRR forecast for non-protected areas of public spending, which we would fit into, was a real terms fall in funding going forward. So if inflation's low, that probably means that government grant funding will just stay flat. But that's the wording I've read this week. So government funding will stay flat, our interest rates will fall, and our costs will go up, and we'll have to manage that gap in future. But we think that for 24-25, we should be relatively stable.
And 25-26.
Probably 25-26 on the assumption that we get a rollover settlement.
I think I read this morning that a year from today is the last feasible day for that there can be a general election within the law. Yeah. So anyway, I just wanted to highlight.
Not that we're counting.
I'll just highlight some paragraphs 20 and 21 about borrowing, because I guess this is quite a new thing in recent times, or maybe ever, for this council. And I think it's a positive thing that we're looking at borrowing from the Public Works Loan Board to fund purchase of housing. It's probably to be determined exactly what we're borrowing for, but I'm just noting that is borrowing to support council service delivery. We're not speculatively buying a shopping centre or
Hotel,
50 solar farms or anything like that. We're doing what I think residents would want us to do. But I think that's, I guess, a new area that councillors have to keep an eye on is the fact that we will be borrowing money from the Public Works Loan Board. And then any comments, Simon, on how that sort of affects how we to look at things?
I think there's a couple of comments really. I mean, first of all, now clearly isn't a good time to borrow in terms of actually taking out physical borrowing. Now we can use our own cash. If we needed to borrow, we can actually run our cash reserves down to start with, although clearly that also has an impact on the amount of interest we earn if our balance is reduced. I think going forward, we as you've alluded to in your comments, there's a lot of focus on borrowing and a proper use of borrowing. The days of being able to borrow for primarily commercial investments are over. Those sets of rules, from SIPRA and government preclude that effectively. If you've got a capital programme that requires you to borrow, I think what we will see is a need to sort of demonstrate a limit to borrowing. That could either be, if you like, a total amount of borrowing compared to your net revenue expenditure, or a proportion of your net revenue expenditure that is funding borrowing costs. And I think at the moment I think it would be expected that we would do it, but I think it will become mandatory that we will do it in due course. So at some point we'll have to, if you like, determine a limit to our ambition and what our capital investment could be that we rely on borrowing. And off the back of that, I think we need to be very clear on what our priorities were for borrowing and what we would look to use borrowing to pay for.
Yeah, I was just thinking as you're speaking there, Simon, I mean, so I'm thinking of some of the things that we might want to be borrowing for. They will be a revenue stream as a result of that borrowing. So I think it might be one of our indicators. So if there's a financial case that says, okay, well, there's a return on this investment, it's not just let's borrow to spread the cost.
Yeah.
Let's invest to save. Let's invest in order to generate new revenue. So I think there's some different criteria, aren't there, that we can apply. Yeah.
There's a question actually for Simon. So from what I've been reading, there was no limit on what councils could borrow from the Public Loans Board. You're saying there still isn't a limit, but the mood has changed and we need to show some responsibility because there could be a limit. Is that correct?
I think if I was SITFA, I'd say there always has been a limit. It's just never been policed or enforced. And I think what's happened is there are some councils that have borrowed sums of money way greater than the size of their balance sheet, or the borrowing cost is now their biggest item of spend, for example, offset by an income stream that's their biggest item of income. And I think the key word that SITFA would use is proportionality. And I think what they would say is those councils did not apply a test of proportionality to their investment, and that's what they'll look to us to do going forward. And I think if we do it off our own bat and demonstrate proportionality, it probably won't become, they won't need to do it. But I think it's incumbent on us to demonstrate the proportionality, or they'll make us demonstrate it.
Right, sum up there. I think Simon's used the technical phrase "okay," which which I think is okay in the context of our strategic plan and what we've currently said that we want to do. So it's not a green light to come up with massive schemes, because we then wouldn't be okay. And the okayness for the next 2 years is based on our assumptions about what income we're going to get from government and what we know is going on in the world. The uncertainty about whether we're okay beyond that is largely due to uncertainty about how much money we're going to get from central government. And I don't think a change of government is going to remove that uncertainty. I think, yes. Central government has an attitude towards local government which doesn't change particularly depending on who's running it. So, and what we're saying about borrowing is it's okay for us to borrow in order to fund long-term service delivery. So if we're talking about council housing, then that is a service that we're providing. It's not a speculative investment. The other obvious one would be the gateway side, where we've actually reduced by looking at what our own needs are. We've reduced the potential borrowing by going down from 5 stories to 4, whilst retaining the income stream from 2 floors. If I refer back to the question that was asked at council. So these are borrowings in order to do what we do, rather than borrowings in order to speculate, which I think is what the government has particularly turned its nose up at. The other thing I heard the Secretary of State saying is that he was encouraging councils to spend their reserves rather than come cap in hand to the government. Which we've set a level below which we don't want our reserves to go, and it seems a prudent thing to do, but it's something that if we are spending our reserves over a period of time, it's something that we probably need to look at as to what our those reserves are. that's probably as far as we can go at this stage, until the reviews of different department spendings. There will be obviously some nasties in there, there always are. And we get new homes bonus for new homes, but those new homes need their refuse collecting, and that increases the cost of that service and any other services as well. So if we leave that there, we thank Simon for his report, and we're noting it, and look forward to the next phase of the budget, which will be after Christmas. If you hear something sooner from the government, I'm sure you'll tell us. Okay. We all noted that.
Noted.
And I think that takes us to the end of the agenda, doesn't it? Yep. I always look for any other business, just in case I can get done by. Okay, thank you. Shall we end that meeting